Okay, I'm going to warn you right now. This is long, and you're going to want to get your calculator for the end problems. All of this is about financial math. So think about when, if you buy a car, you got to borrow money to pay it back. So that's kind of what this is talking about. The principal is how much money you have to borrow, or you can also put money into a bank and it can earn compound interest on the account. So you don't have to write anything from this page. This is the important one. This is your formula. I'm going to say U sub n is the final amount. U sub 0 is the initial amount. And because we're talking about money, that's why we're going to change this just a little. Use the 0 as the initial again. N is the number of times per year or time periods. I is interest. And then we're just going to plug a bunch of stuff in. All right, so our first problem is we're investing $5,000. So we're going to say U sub, let me just say N for now. We need our initial amount. This is our principal. Invested for 4 years at 7%. So 1 plus, remember, we always have to move our decimal. 1 plus 0.07 compounded annually, so 1 time a year for 4 years is 4. Then we just plug all that in, plug that into your calculator. I would probably combine this because that's just 1.07 to the 4th. And if you plug this into your calculator correctly, that's how much she will have at the end of that period. So if she invested $5,000 and now she has this amount in her account, letter B says how much interest? Well, we just take our total amount minus the amount we invested. And we would always round dollars to the nearest cent and label it with dollars. And that's just our basic formula. Now it gets a little more complicated. All right. Notice that I have 2 example 12s. I have no idea why. So just cross off that next one. All right. So when it's compounded more than once during the year, that changes our formula just a little bit. We're using the same basic formula, but compounded quarterly means 4 times a year. All right. Our interest is 0.03, but that's for our annual interest. So anytime you have so many times a year, we're going to have to divide our interest. All right, let me just, U sub n equals our principal, our initial amount, 1 plus, we have to take our rate and divide that by the number of times per year. And then how many times will it be compounded? For 4 years, we're going to do it 4 times a year, so that's 16. So think through those 2 things. If it's not compounded annually, you're going to have to put this number in with the time here and divide the interest rate here. All right. So then we have 5,000. So if I divide this and add 1, I get 1.0075 Plug that into the calculator. I'm going to label it pounds, this little L thing here. 5634.96. Always rounding to the nearest cent. All right. So it's just a lot of practice at the formula, looking at when it's compounded different amounts. All right. How much does she need to invest now? So our question is, how much we're looking for our initial amount. This is what we don't know in the equation. So we know our final amount. We want to earn $10,000 by the end. So we need to know how much to invest now so I get $10,000 later. Twice annually means N is 2 here. My interest rate is 0.08. So I take 1 plus my interest rate divided by 2, my N, raised to my N2 times 4 years is 8. So I really use this number twice. I divide the interest and I multiply by my years. All right. So I'm going to simplify my interest. So this is 1 plus, when I divide 0.08 by 2, I get 0.04 to the 8th. To get u sub 0 by itself, I just divide both sides. So be very careful how you input this. Don't just trust me. Make sure you can get the same amount using your calculator, because you're not just going to be able to copy my stuff down later. And we're investing it now, so what they did was rounded this value to the nearest dollar, because it seems silly to invest. It ends up being like 90 cents. So they just rounded it up to the nearest dollar on how much to invest right now. So always make sure you're practicing plugging all this in to make sure you can get the correct amount on your calculator. Okay, so inflation is the general increase in the price of goods and services over time. Unfortunately, inflation reduces purchasing power. So it means your money now is going to be worth less later because of inflation. Okay, so we want to purchase a painting that is currently worth $5,000. All right, so that's our present amount. So we're going to actually look for our index, and it doesn't really say that there. Our indexed amount. So we call it indexed value, how much it's actually going to be worth later. If it's currently worth $5,000 and she makes monthly payments into an investment account so she can purchase the painting in 3 years' time. All right. So inflation means that we're going to, this is our interest rate. So 1 plus, and this is per year, so that's nice, 0.025 for 3 years. All right. So when I plug all this into my calculator, even though the painting is just worth $5,000 now, if she could buy it now, she would just need $5,000. But due to inflation, she's going to have to save up this much money if she waits 3 years to buy it, because it's going to be worth more. Okay, so it reduces your purchasing power, because if you could pay it now, you would just need $5,000. But if you wait 3 years, you're now going to need that much more money in order to buy it, because it's worth more. So that's what we call our indexed value. How much is it for later. Okay, real value now is kind of going backwards. So the real value is just the final value in terms of today's money. Okay, so we multiply by the inflation value. So if we go back to figure out today's value, we're going to divide. So let's look at how this makes sense. Okay, first of all, she invested $4,000 for 5 years for this 4.8% interest. Half yearly means my N is 2 over, and this is our inflation. So we'll put this on hold for just a minute. So first of all, calculate the investment after 5 years. So U sub n equals the amount we invested times 1 plus the interest rate as a decimal divided by half yearly 2 raised to the 5 years twice a year. 5 times 2, that's 10 times it will be compounded. All right. So if I simplify my decimal, this ends up being 1.024 to the 10th. You plug all that into your calculator. This is my future value, final value of my account when I invested $4,000. So what they're saying is, if I invest $4,000 now and this is how much I'm going to have in my account, this much money in 5 years is not really going to be worth $5,000 because inflation, my dollar will be worth less than a dollar is today. So if we want to calculate the real value, I take my real value, whatever that might be, that's what we're going to look for. And that's where this part comes into play. My inflation over the period was 3% per year. So I'm going to take whatever my real value is, that's what we're going to find, 1 plus 0.03 to the 5 years to the 5th. Okay, so this is how much inflation is going to decrease my dollar amount. How much will this be, my real value of my invested amount here? So what I'm trying to figure out, how much will $5,000 be worth in the 5 years, in 5 years from now? So this is what they were saying. We divide the value, this value, future value, by the inflation amount. So we're going to divide by this. To find my real value of the amount that I'm going to have saved. So if I divide these two, my real value is $4,373.94. So if you think about what this is saying, and this doesn't maybe have a tangible meaning to you yet, but it's saying if you invest all this money and you are up to $5,000 after 5 years, 5 years from now, $5,000 is really just going to be worth $4,373.94. So this amount is only worth this much. That's kind of a confusing concept, but okay. And then depreciation is kind of the same thing. It's basically, now if you ever have heard your parents talk about buying a car, if you buy a brand new car, say it's worth $20,000, as soon as you drive that car off the lot, it depreciates and they might only give you $17,000. Like literally, if you turn around, drive back on the lot, you're not going to get what you paid for. That's depreciation, the loss in value of an item over time. All right, so the key for this is you subtract the interest rate. All right. So you purchased a dishwasher for 2,400 pounds and it depreciated by 15%. All right, so its value after 6 years, U sub n equals my initial amount, 2,400, but now instead of adding the interest, we're going to subtract my percent to the 6, raised to the 6th power, the 6 years. We still put time always in the exponent position. All right. If a value depreciates, very important, the portion that you are raising to a power needs to be less than 1. If it depreciates, that means that your base amount has to be less than 1. We call that decay. Decay is when your base is in between 0 and 1. Growth, your money or whatever grows if the base is greater than 1. So that's a quick check. If you're looking at something that's decaying in value, this needs to be between 0 and 1. If it's growing in value, it needs to be more than 1. Plug it all in, and we have pounds, 905 pounds and 16 pence. Okay. How much did it depreciate? Well, if it started out worth 2,400, now it's only worth 905.16. It lost 1,494.84 pounds. That's how much it depreciated after 6 years. Okay, so the next part is all about technology. So I don't know if you have any extra space somewhere. I think we're just going to list each of these values as we go, but this kind of tells you what everything is. What you're going to want, if you're using technology, you're going to push the purple apps button, and you're going to look for finance, and we're going to enter values into all of these categories except the one category we need. All right, for example, Sally invests this much money in her account that pays this percent interest, compounded monthly, that's 12. How much is her investment worth after 5 years? That's our time. Okay, so we're going to go to apps, the purple apps button, finance, and you're going to click on TVM Solver. This is going to do all of our math for us. Okay, so this first N is how many times how many payments a year or total will there be? If we're compounding it 12 times a year for 5 years, we just take our time times our compounded to get 60 total. So just enter the number 60 into N on your calculator. Then we need to find, let me get my calculator. All right, the next is your interest. And you don't have to change the decimal point. You literally just type in 4.25 for I. This is kind of weird. The present value, if you're investing $15,000, you're actually going to be out $15,000 from your account, but because you're putting it into an investment. The payment value or present value always needs a negative. Make sure it's the negative underneath the 3 that you're using, not the minus sign. 15,000, that's your PV. Payment. This is always going to be 0 for these problems because you're investing it as a one-time investment. You're not doing it as a payment every month. It's just a one-time plopping that money into an account. Future value. That's what we're actually looking for. There's always going to be one spot in when you're typing the numbers in that will be 0. This is going to be what we're looking for on this particular app. The part you're looking for has to be 0. Payment's always going to be 0, but then you're going to have one other value that's 0. Payments per year. These two are always going to be the same amount, and that's going to be the number of times per year it's compounded. Okay. Just always leave the payment at the end of the month rather than the beginning of the next month. Now you need to move your cursor, go up to the future value, and leave it on the 0. Then you're going to click the green alpha button and hit enter. Notice on top of the enter, the green says solve. It's going to solve the problem for you, but you have to be on the future value. Your cursor has to be on the future value right now because that's what you're solving. You're telling the calculator to solve it. And we get a future value once you hit enter of 18,544.53, and that's my answer. So we're going to, all the rest of these problems are just entering values in for all these spots and finding an answer. Okay, example 19. Here's our interest rate, 5.2%, compounded quarterly. That's our payments per year. And the CY year, that's always the same at 4. How much does she need to deposit now? That's going to be our future, or we're looking for present value, how much she does now. Now is present, so I'm going to put 0 next to present value. Oh, and how many total payments? Quarterly. I take my quarterly for 3 years. 4 times 3, I'm going to put 12 in for this N. And I want to earn $5,000 at a future time. Future value is $5,000. I think that's everything. Okay, once you enter all these into your calculator, because you just have to keep going back to apps and redoing this whole process. Plug it all. Actually, you don't even need to do that. Just go back and retype all the new numbers in. That's what I was doing. So we're looking for the present value. So you want to go put your cursor back on this spot on the 0. Then do your alpha enter to solve the problem. And the present value comes out to be $4,282.10. So notice as soon as you click the green alpha enter, it solves it, and that there's a number that goes in the missing spot. Okay, let's try the next couple. Actually, these are the last 2. All right. For how long? This is our time period that we don't know. All right, so N is 0. This is the part we don't know. Then we have our interest rate, 6.45. Our present value is always negative, We're investing $4,000. My future value, how much do I want to have? Turn $4,000 into $10,000. Compounded half yearly, twice a year, so that's 2. So both my payments per year, both of these are always going to be the same, so that's going to be 2. Then put your cursor back onto N, hit the green alpha, enter to solve it. Now, be really careful. This is 29 half years, correct? Because this is half yearly. Our time period is half yearly. So that means if this is half years, divide that by 2. If we have 29 half years, we actually have 14.5 total years. All right, last problem. That's going to be my present value. If I invest $5,000, that's negative 5,000. Monthly, that'll be 12. There's my time. We're looking for the interest. All right. So 2.5, my N is 12 times 2.5, which is 30. My I is what I'm looking for, so I put 0 in for I. My future value, I want to earn $6,000 at a future date. My present is always negative, but my future is always positive. How much I'm going to have back in my hands. Payments per year. That's my monthly. That's both of these is 12. Then go back, put your cursor on the interest, and green alpha, enter. You should get an interest rate of 7.32%. Always make sure you're doing 3 sig figs for everything but money. Money, you always want to round to the nearest cent.